Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Affleck. I'm here from mypokercoaching.com. Today, we are going to be talking about bankroll management tips for 2024. Bankroll management, often a very underlooked topic in poker. And after you become a winning poker player, bankroll management might be one of the most important skills. Um, Today, I really want to talk about some of the variables of bankroll management. Once you understand what factors go into managing your bankroll, it becomes a little bit easier to have better control with your bankroll. Um, and in the past, I think there's always been, or when I'm coaching or doing live webinars, you get these people asking for very, very strict rules on bankroll management. And I don't think that's really the correct way to go about bankroll management. You really need to be fluid in the situation, which depends on what type of games you're playing, how soft your games are, how big the games are. We're going to get into all these different types of things, but I think bankroll management should be looked at more of a fluid type of situation rather than a strict, like, yes or no type of situation. And going to that, you need to know when to deviate with those without those hard rules. So there is a kind of an art to it, but once you understand it a little bit better, which hopefully after today's video you will, um, you'll be able to make some better adjustments and maximize your expected value in 2024. So we're going to start off by talking about different types of poker, and what factors you need to be considering within those game types, because bankroll management is not static with the different game types. There's so many different types of poker, and so understanding how each of them intersect with bankroll management is really important. So we'll talk about right now with multi-table tournaments. These are probably the most popular form of poker right now. They're booming since the pandemic. Everyone kind of knows this, especially live tournaments. And number one, the size of the field matters. And I think people really don't consider the difference in variance that you're going to face in a 1,000-person field versus a 100-person field. Um, that is a big, big part of tournament poker variance, the size of the fields. Also, your expected ROI and your edge. These are the two big factors in tournament poker. So you got two levers that are going to affect your variance in tournament poker. It's going to be the size of the field and the expected ROI. Now, these a little bit counteract against each other because in general, we can probably assume a tournament with a 1,000-person field, you're going to have a higher ROI. And a tournament with a 100-person field, you're probably going to have a lower ROI. We can think of this in terms of, in a heads up sit and go. We look at a heads up sit and go. The maximum ROI you could ever have is 100%. And that's if you win 100% of the time, which you're never going to win 100% of the time, even against the worst player in the world. We all know this and understand this if you're a winning poker player. However, in a large field poker tournament, there's upwards you could win, 100 times you're buying, 200 times you're buying, even some tournaments are 1,000 times you're buying. So there is, the larger the field, the more potential ROI to be gained. Likely because there's more potential to have weaker players in the field that are going to be losing money that can be gained by other players. So you have your edge or ROI, however you want to look at that, and the size of the field. Now, size of the field matters a lot with variance just because of the amount of all ins, the amount of situations you're going to have to navigate throughout a tournament. And so the skill edge doesn't lessen, but there's just a lot more variance to get to the final table, get to big money in a 1,000-person field than in a 100-person field. So there's kind of that balancing act. Now, if you could find a 9-person tournament where you could have a 50% ROI, like you should just play 9-person tournaments with a 50% ROI because you're going to have much less variance because of there being a smaller field size. but you're also going to have this huge win rate because presumably if you have a 50% ROI in a 9-person tournament, you're just playing with people that don't understand the rules, essentially. Sit and goes are going to have lower ROIs just because the maximum you could win is much less. Typically, it's like 3 buy-ins to first place. So, understanding those two levers in multi-table tournaments is really important. Um, I would suggest it's always better to be much more conservative with your bankroll management in live tournaments or any tournaments for that matter than too aggressive. And often people are just way too aggressive with bankrolls in live tournaments. Um, Also, with in terms of variance, it's just hard to put in a lot of volume in tournaments if you're playing live. Now, online, it's much easier to put in live volume, but in live poker, you can't multi-table in tournaments, so the variance over time is very, very long. So again, just to summarize these multi-table tournaments, understanding the size of the field and the expected ROI or edge that you have on the field, those are the two levers that you're kind of pushing and pulling against in understanding bankroll management in multi-table tournaments. Cash games are much easier to understand in terms of variance because there's only one variable in cash games, and that is your win rate. How many big blinds are you winning per hour? How many big blinds are you winning per 100 hands? Your EV, BB per 100. However you want to look at it, there's different ways we can measure this, but your win rate is the only variance. The size of the a tournament field and stuff is not an issue in cash games. Softer games is going to equal higher win rate. And variance is directly correlated to your win rate. So therefore, the larger your win rate, the lower your variance, so you can be more aggressive with your bankroll management. The lower your win rate, the higher your variance, so you need more buy-ins to absorb that variance in your bankroll management. Okay, so being very honest, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but being very honest with what your win rate is and tracking that and being very diligent in understanding the games that you play in is extremely important to know whether you want to keep 30 buy-ins in your bankroll, 50 buy-ins in your bankroll, 75 buy-ins in your bankroll in terms of cash games, and also just how aggressively you want to either take shots or move up in stakes or move down in stakes has to greatly deal with the softness of the games. Spin and goes don't happen in live poker, but they are a form of online poker that has gotten pretty popular, mostly on the non-American poker sites. But these are three-handed games, and they're games of very, very, very small margins. It's really hard to have a high win rate in these spin and go games. One, because there's only 3 players. Two, because the structures are very, very fast. So with these small edges, again, small win rate, we're going to have higher variance, which means we want to be very conservative with our bankroll management. Only having 3 players, it's a small field size, and it's really hard to beat these games for greater than like a 5% ROI. Sometimes a lot of these spin and goes, you're trying to beat the games for 1 to 2% ROI and then make the rest of your money from rake back. So you do have significant short-term variance due to a low edge. However, it's easy to put in a lot of volume because the time of game is very short. So therefore, you can put a ton of volume in and eliminate short-term variance in a shorter time span. Versus, say, live tournament poker, if you're playing a live tournament MTT, you can't really reduce the time of variance because you can only play one tournament at a time. That's like pretty important. I'll talk about this as a little off the beat and path here with this slideshow. But it's important to recognize variance and length of time in terms of 2 variables. Like it's volume in terms of number of games, and then also like the length of time. So what I mean by that, we'll just talk about MTTs. Online, if I play 30 tournaments a day, and play, let's just say 30 days out of the month, I'm playing 900 tournaments a month. Live, you're only playing, if you play a lot, let's say 250 tournaments a year. So in 1 month you're playing 3 times the volume online. So that short-term variance is condensed in terms of time frames, versus in live poker it's spread out over a long time. That's why these downswings live feel much longer than they actually are, because you can't put in that many games or that many number of hands in live poker compared to online. Sit and goes. So sit and goes, very similar to tournaments. You're going to have a lower ROI in MTTs due to smaller field size. You're going to have a higher in the money percentage though, because of that small field size. So typically 3 players get paid out of 9. So you're going to have much less variance in MTTs. You will have some short-term variance. However, you can often put in a lot of volume. The game time is much shorter than a multi-table tournament, so therefore it's easier to put in more games. So similar in MTTs, the larger your edge in the tournament, the less buy-ins are required. The lower your edge, the more buy-ins are required. So in terms of understanding EV and understanding your win rate, this is very, very key in terms of bankroll management, is understanding your win rate. So win rate influences variance and buy-in requirements for every form of poker. That's why at the beginning there was kind of the caveat. The first step is to become a winning player, because if you're not a winning player, this is just not a non-issue, because you're just going to lose money over the long run. Win rate is going to depends very heavily on your opponents. So game selection is super important, not just for winning a lot of money, but reducing downswings, having a more consistent source of income. All these things, game selection is just so important in games. Obviously, with win rate, studying, improving your game, and becoming a better technical player is going to be very important in improving your win rate. But game selection is kind of a quick, easy way to do it without getting better at poker. So it's important, just when you're playing against weak players, you can be very aggressive with your bankroll management. When you're in tough games, you want to be very conservative with that bankroll. So taking shots in soft games that don't normally form. So I have a general rule in terms of when I'm playing like live cash. Let's just say this isn't in terms of taking shots, but if I say I'm going to play till 10 p.m. at night, I will only play past 10 p.m. if the game is like a game that doesn't normally form, in terms of, is my win rate in this game astronomical, like much higher than my normal win rate. And so if I'm just in an average game, I'm going to leave, assuming I put in, if I go in at 2 and it's 10 o'clock, I've put in 7-8 hours. I want to keep a sleep schedule, that type of stuff, stay fresh for the next day, I will leave. But if it's a game where my win rate I think is double, there's a tilted player spewing off money, there's a game with 0 professionals and it's all like recreationals, and it's a game that maybe like I don't see a game this soft, once every 2 weeks, I'm going to play that game as long as I can. And taking shots, you can kind of have a similar like mind frame with that, where if the game like at one stake up from you looks like you walk in and the game is just, wow, I don't know anyone in that game, or isn't there the scene from the Rounders, I think, the movie, where they walk into the poker room and it's like, wow, I can't believe that player's playing that game. They normally don't play that big. And so recognizing like when to take shots, when games are soft, and the better player you are, the higher your win rate, the better you become at recognizing these types of situations. So being very aggressive when games that don't normally form. Now, I say don't normally form because, like I said in my cash game sessions, when I try to end my session, I wouldn't necessarily take shots in games that like are always available. Taking shots in games where it's like exceptionally good or exceptionally better than average, and you can, that's a judgment call, but kind of that's when you want to take shots, because in the other one it should be like taking shots is always available if that game is always running. So calculated risk when the reward is worth it. Some general bankroll management tips. One, keep your bankroll separated from everyday cash. I'm a big believer that personal finance is not taught very well in America and in schools, and people are very bad at keeping their own personal finances in check, let alone a lot of poker players in terms of how they keep their finances. You should have separate bank accounts, separate, whatever it is, how you want to do it, but you don't want to commingle these funds. You want to have your own personal funds for your personal expenses, your rent, all that stuff. Your bankroll stays separate. Your poker expenses stay separate. Separating business from personal is super important in being, whether you're a professional, an aspiring amateur, whatever it is, you want to be keeping everything separate. Um, as much as possible, you want to minimize withdrawals from your bankroll. The quicker you can move up in stakes, the more money you're going to make, the more opportunities that are available for taking shots. Uh, Minimizing withdrawals is super important. Um, and now, if you're taking a salary out of your bankroll every month, then you want to be super conservative with your everyday life expenses so that you can minimize the amount you're taking out of your bankroll. Um, just wanting to grow that bankroll and continuing to move up in stakes and having the ability to play as many games as possible, where you can game select the best, have the biggest win rates, is just super important. Be willing to take aggressive shots when needed. Notice when games that are very irregular form. Um, you know, if the biggest stake that runs in your room, your normal poker room is 2-5 no limit, and a 5-10 runs, and it's a lot of players that normally would not play 5-10 that are very that you're going to have a large win rate over. That's a game you should probably take a shot in. Set aside a certain amount, take your shot, um, and you can grind it back out at your normal stakes if you need to. Being willing to drop down the stakes when needed. So when you go on a downswing, sometimes maybe moving slightly down in stakes, regaining confidence, um, being able to have the mentality to drop down in stakes allows you to be slightly more aggressive with your bankroll. Because if you do go on a downswing, you just move down in stakes. But that becomes very dangerous because most players don't have the mentality, or they have too big of an ego to drop down in stakes. Um, so, depending how willing or how big of an ego you have, that can really have a difference on how aggressive you can be with your bankroll. Finally, be a frugal spender on non-poker expenses while playing. Um, Especially if you're a live player. This more specifically would apply to live tournament players. Travel expenses, hotels, food, if you're getting massages at the table, all these things add up, and they're just taken away from your win rate and your bankroll, and you want to minimize those as much as possible. You can also consider that in your everyday life, being frugal, so you don't have to remove as much money from your bankroll. Uh, the most you the more you can reduce expenses, the better your bankroll is going to be. Finally, I just want to talk about what can be tracked. Um, what can be tracked can be improved upon. So, being very diligent about tracking your win rate in poker. So, whether you play online and you can use a program like Poker Tracker, which or Hold'em Manager, or if you play live poker, having an app on your phone like Poker Income or any other phone apps that allow you to track your sessions, your win rate, your money per hour, your how many big blinds per hour, all those different metrics. Um, Being very, very important. You want to have a good idea of what your win rates are. Because as we've talked about multiple times, win rates are everything in terms of variance and bankroll management. The bigger your win rate, the more aggressive you can be with your bankroll. And the more aggressive you can be with your bankroll, the more efficient the use of capital is. And so like efficiency and use of capital um, in the finance world is pretty important, and it's important in the poker world. And capital is really, in my opinion, uh, not used that efficiently in poker. Now, if you notice in the slide as we kind of wrap up, I haven't given any specific bankroll numbers in terms of how many buy-ins do you need. What are the rules. I want this video to be a very more about what factors do you need to consider and how to be very fluid and understand how to manage your bankroll rather than just having strict rules, and kind of the teaching of someone to fish rather than just giving them the fish themselves. So hopefully at the end of this you understand poker variance a little bit better, how it affects win rates, how it affects how aggressive or conservative we want to be in poker, knowing the types of games you play and how those are going to affect your win rates, how game selection is going to be very important in terms of bankroll management, all these different factors. Thank you everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe this video, and I will see you next time.